Alright, so in today's video we're going to take a look at another Bachmann Branchline Class 37, except this one's going to be in the Mainline livery. Now, unlike the last Bachmann Diesel Class 37 that we tore down, that was the one that was in the rail freight livery. This one was in much worse shape than it arrived and required quite a bit of TLC to get it up and running. Now, if you're one of my few subscribers and you keep track of the channel, you'll probably notice it's been almost 5 months since I released a video, and the reason for that and why I'm dubbing over this video today is that, funnily enough, I recorded this video 2 days after I published the last teardown. And I started getting some cold-like symptoms, and I thought, it's no big deal. But unfortunately, after dodging COVID for almost 3 years, it finally caught up, and it absolutely wrecked me. It took me out I was out of work for almost 3 weeks, almost 4 weeks, something like that. And unfortunately, I'm still feeling the effects of that today. So if you hear me a little bit out of breath and I have to mute more than normal, that's why. But enough of that sob story. Hey ho, let's take a look at this this Class 37. So I think the reason that that this locomotive was in worse shape than the other one is because when it arrived, it had a big footprint on the box, and unfortunately had quite a large dent, like a rip in the cardboard. And so I assume what happened, it's no fault of the seller, but along the postal route, somebody must have kicked the box, and it caused quite a bit of damage here on the right hand side. The door won't open, and the reason for that is because the glass inside the cab area has been pushed back. Also, the horn was bent, almost snapped off, and a couple of the detail parts fell off the front as well. So you can see right here in the bottom right hand corner, one of the detail parts fell out of the front. But not the end of the world. It was mostly a clean break, and actually not even a break. It just kind of popped out. So I'll put that back in just a second. We'll add a little bit of Tamiya glue, and do a little bit of repair to the horn, and it'll be good as new. And anybody who's been in this hobby long enough knows that parts falling off is just par for the course, unfortunately. And so getting used to repairs is just part of the process. Your first broken part is a rite of passage, I feel like. So you can see right here the window's been pushed back, but not the end of the world. So we'll go ahead and get the screws off, which are in the usual places. You've got one just behind the bogies, and two in the front, and it's mirrored, so it's on both sides. Now, one of the things I like to do anytime I purchase a quote-unquote new used locomotive off eBay is I always like to take the jeweler loop and take a close look at the wheels. And if somebody's tried to clean them, either with rubbing alcohol or say like a Trix cleaner, then you can tell pretty quick. But this one looks like it's never been run before, at least not that I can tell. So I'm going to fast forward through some of the stuff, and the reason why is all I'm doing here is getting off some of the excess oil that's kind of leaked onto the body, and I'm just using a little bit of Dawn/Fairy dish soap with some warm water, and I just want to make sure that I'm sure they're using plastic safe oil, but I still want to get that off to make sure it doesn't cause any damage to the paint. Even if I end up weathering it later down the line, I still don't want to have any damage if we could avoid it. So again here, nothing exciting, just going over the body and making sure all that excess oil is removed. And I just want to point out, if you're new to model railroading, you want to be careful, especially if you're buying locomotives that are, say, 10 years or older. You don't want to scrub too hard, and you definitely don't want to use something like rubbing alcohol, because it'll take off the paint. So you can see down there, I just used my plastic opener and popped the window right back into place, and no big deal. thankfully. Now the next thing that I'll do is I'll usually take a jeweler's loop and take a look at not just the contacts, but the chipboards that control the LEDs. Since when you see damage like that or the window popped in, it can sometimes hit those LEDs, and they're not particularly difficult to replace. You know, you can get a small LED off of eBay and solder on if you're good with a soldering iron. But you know, it's always nice if you can avoid having to do that in the first place. And in the case of this locomotive, the LEDs were they were fine. Nothing was damaged. And although it's a quick glance, I'm also taking a look at the control boards in the front and rear that control the front and rear LEDs to make sure there's no damage. And another thing to keep an eye out for is things like dog hair. So if you're purchasing, you know, if you're purchasing new, this is not a big deal. But if you're purchasing a used locomotive, you want to make sure there's no hair or anything inside the locomotive that could potentially cause a short, especially on the front and rear LED control boards, because those are a little harder to work on than just replacing the cab LED. So here, look at that poor horn. So it was bent over pretty good. So they must have really kicked that box, because you figure you got to go through the, you know, the cardboard box plus the bubble wrap it was in, and the ice cube shell that these are housed in. So it was a good whack, whoever kicked it, unfortunately. But you know, just carefully move the horn back. Now, just a quick tip: if you feel like the horn may potentially snap off by doing what I just did, you can also take a hair dryer to the top and just, you know, heat up the plastic gently, and it'll kind of go back smoothly, and you're less likely to risk snapping it off. But I felt pretty confident it was okay, so we add a little bit of Tamiya glue on the bottom, and that'll ensure that it stays put and doesn't not only doesn't bend, but it won't come off in the future if there is any weak spots. And then just for kicks, I decided to add just a touch of glue on the left horn, just in case it's coming loose and I wasn't able to tell. And that's actually something I have a habit of doing in all of the rolling stock and locomotives that I buy. Is I'll oftentimes just take just a touch of Tamiya glue to the separately added parts, just to make sure they don't fall off. In fact, I just got back from a trip to London, and I purchased my first set of Oxford rail coaches, and I'm really looking forward to showing you those on a future video, since the detailing parts are awesome. But they fall off so easy, and so I add a little bit of Tamiya glue in almost every single separately added part, just to ensure they don't pop off again in the future. I don't know why they don't do that at the factory. Maybe in case you want to weather them or paint them further. I don't know, but they do fall off pretty easily. So try to be, I don't know if you caught that, but try to be careful when you're pushing with your tweezers. I was pushing a little aggressively, and I almost went right through the front of the body there. I think I was just a little out of it at the time. Now if you look closely there, you can see there's like a little flap cover, and I believe that's where a power socket would normally go into. And on one side it's perfect, and on this side you can see, was it this side? It's a little bent, and so I had to carefully move that back and kind of, I don't want to say glue it into place, but mold it into place, since the Tamiya glue will heat up the plastic. So if you kind of hold it back and then add that glue, it'll warm up, and you just, you know, try to be as steady as you can, and it'll kind of freeze it into place permanently. So here what I'm doing is some of the wires, it looked like they shifted a bit and it was rubbing up against the motor, the flywheel. So I was just moving out of the way to make sure those we don't have any rubbing issues. Now, what I do with any locomotive that's been purchased, off of the bay, is oftentimes if it's been sitting for a while, quote unquote new, you'll have all the oil will kind of drop onto the bogie covers. So you don't have to if you're not comfortable with it. There's nothing wrong with just leaving it as is. Typically these days, especially with the newer locos, I find that the oil that's in there is usually good enough for you to run it. But I like to take as much of it off as possible, and then I'll bring out my own lubricants and kind of start fresh. Since sitting on the bogie cover is not going to do much good. You need to get it into the to the gears. And I don't know if I'm the only one, but I also find that the factory gets a little crazy with it. I think that's why there's so much leakage. Is they seem to add more than what I think is than is necessary sometimes. So just a half a pea size will do it. And once I finish lubricating, I typically won't take my locomotives apart for a good 2 or 3 years, sometimes longer. Longest I'll go is about 5 years, 2 to 5 years before I service them again. And it depends if one starts making noise or something. Now here you got to be extra careful. So when you unscrew the bogie from the chassis, you just want to make sure you don't yank on those wires. There's typically enough slack to pull the bogie all the way out, but I'll kind of gently pull on the wires to give myself some slack, and that'll allow me to clean the tops of the wheels, top of the bogie, get off additional excess grease, and then finally get the drive shafts cleaned up. And I do this on almost every locomotive I purchased before letting it go on the layout. And here I'm using my favorite lubricant, Labelle. Um, Obviously, we're not big enough here to have sponsors. I just like it. I actually use it, not Labelle, not just on my locomotives, but I find that it works quite well on mechanical clocks too. So long as you have the right viscosity level for the particular mechanical object you're working on. So now I'm kind of just repeating the same process on the other side. And the reason why I go this far is because, as you saw when the bogie covers were off, you have all this excess oil. That tends to be the case on the top as well. A lot of times you have a lot of excess oil that sits on the top of the bogies, and sometimes it'll even leak onto the control boards, and that's just a recipe for issues. Although I'm assuming the oil that they are using is, quote unquote, non-conductive. When you get enough hair, dust, and junk on there, it's eventually going to cause a problem. So I like to just clean it up. I mentioned earlier not to use rubbing alcohol. That's true for the body, but on the chipboards, I'll usually use a high alcohol content rubbing alcohol and get those all kind of cleaned up. Same thing for the electrical contacts as well. Typically, I'll use rubbing alcohol, either a 70 or a 90 depending on the situation. There's kind of a trick to putting these screws back in on the bogies, because if you put them in too tight, they won't rock, and so it'll cause derailments. And if you put them in too loose, then the body will kind of lean to one side after it's taken a turn. So right here, all I'm doing is, I mean, the best thing to do would be to completely remove the chassis to reveal the motor underneath. But as I mentioned, I was starting to feel a little under the weather and just wasn't really in the mood for it. And so I just, oiled the main oil points, which is, unless there's a major issue, that's all you need to do half the time anyway. Now, we're almost done with the teardown here before I put it on the track. And one of the issues that I was having is that this loco would only go in one direction. It would move relatively smooth on one direction, and it would absolutely stutter on the opposite direction. The lights worked, but it wasn't running. And for the first time, I'm not kidding. I don't know how many decoders I've gone through, but sometimes you get advice on the forums. Well, it could be a bad decoder, and I'm always like, yeah, I roll my eyes at it. But sure enough, that's what happened. I really got a bad decoder. It was brand new out of the package. Put it on there. It was having issues, and after hooking it up to JMRI, doing some diagnostics, I finally figured out, yep, it was a bad decoder. And I never quite know how these, I really don't run them before recording the video, but you can see here I was a bit disappointed because it just wasn't moving the way it was supposed to. So I gave everything a look over again, trying to figure out if there's any, if the drive shaft wasn't connected, if any of the gears had come loose, and everything appeared to be just fine. So, and back out onto the track. And it was about this point that I realized there was probably an issue somewhere else. I thought it was a chipboard at first, but I eventually figured out it was the decoder. So I got to give a shout out to Soundtracks. In previous videos, I've mentioned that I really like the DCC mobile decoder that they have. It's like 25 bucks, and I'm sure it's gone up in price with inflation now. But I've never had one fail, and this was the first time having to fill out a warranty claim, and the process was super easy. I filled out the form, let them know what was going on, mailed it out. It arrived in a few days. They verified the issue, and like I think it was like 48 hours, and they sent out another decoder. And I was down a decoder for a week maybe, and it was just a super smooth process, no issues. So I can feel pretty confident continuing to recommend them. They were really good about replacing the broken decoder. So while I was waiting for the new decoder to come in, I decided, well, can't do much else, so let's get the detail parts on. And one of the mistakes that I made that I want to point out, and it was a pretty rookie mistake, is that the brake hose, or I think that's what that is, the brake line that I just applied, I had added some Tamiya glue on the top and the bottom. Don't do that, because what ended up happening is when it came time to put the new decoder in, I had realized my mistake. And now with this particular locomotive, I have to make sure that when I remove the shell, I'm careful not to snap that brake line, because it's glued in on both spots. So glue it on the bottom, leave the top part loose. That way you can still remove the shell. Don't make that rookie mistake that I did. Getting these parts in can be a little tricky, and just a little tip: if you ever get a hole on the body that's just a little too tight, you can take your, if you have fine tweezers like I have here, you can warm them up on the stove or with a lighter and just kind of poke the hole, and it'll open it up. I mean, be careful. It'll open it up just enough to get that part in, and then when you glue it in, it'll hold in place, so we don't have to worry about accidentally breaking one of the hoses. And I did get that glue off the buffer, if you happen to notice I got some on there. It was just like I said, I think I was a little bit out of it this day. I should have just been resting, but you know, trains first, right? So at this point, the new decoder was in place, and immediately the previous issues were resolved. It ran in both directions without the stuttering problem. And other than the stiffness that usually accompanies a quote-unquote new slash used locomotive, after a 30 to 60 minute running session, it was running just fine. The oil kicked in, and it still runs well to this day. So that's pretty much it for this video. Stick around. I've got more videos coming out this month since I picked up a lot of stuff while I was in London, and I'm really looking forward to showing you how the layout has progressed since the last teardown video. So I'll go ahead and leave you with a little bit of shunting action, and I'll see you on the next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye bye.